Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your patience. We were just waiting for one more speaker to connect. They were just having a bit of technical challenges. Welcome to today's webinar, which is on the global narrative on the war in Ukraine. This is obviously a very topical discussion. The Ukraine war has been happening for about 4 months, and I think it's about 3 to 4 days since it started on the 24th of February. And the world has changed. In the beginning, I think a lot of people took it, especially who weren't in Europe, took it a bit lightly and maybe didn't see it becoming what it is today. And now I think the world over has felt the drastic effects of the war in Ukraine. But not only that, we have a different understanding of the war, I feel, in different parts and different regions of the world. And that's the main point of this discussion today, to get a perspective from Africa, as well as from Asia and from Latin America. And hopefully we'll be able to come up with a general sense and a general idea of where we stand as the world on the war in Ukraine, and whether there's actually anything we can do to make everybody's lives a little bit easier. So we have some fantastic speakers who are with us today. We have Justin Arenstein, Ari Sasmito, and we have Keiso Mohloboli. And Keiso is still to join us. She is logging in. And I'm going to give maybe just another 2 minutes for some more guests to join us. And also for our co-moderator to join us as well. So if you could be patient with us for the next 2 minutes, that would be great. Okay, good afternoon once again. My name is Miss Aurra, Aurra Kawanzaruwa, or whatever you want to call me. Miss Aurra is fine. And I'm the manager at DCN Africa, which is part of DCN Global. And this is a discussion brought to you by DCN Global. Today, I'm joined by Nikos Panagiotou, the president of DCN Global, as well as Ayana, who is also a member of the DCN Global team. And together, we're going to have a great discussion along with our speakers who are all here with us today in the waiting room to talk about the global narrative on the war in Ukraine. So if you'll give me just a few minutes to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Justin, who's the founder of Code for Africa, the continent's largest digital journalism and digital democracy incubator with staff labs in 21 countries. He's a veteran investigative data journalist, and Justin also serves as editor-in-chief of 3 of CFA's teams focused on investigating disinformation and influence operations. This includes the continent's largest fact-checking organization, PesaCheck, with full-time researchers in 14 countries, plus the ANCIR forensic analysis team that tackles state-driven influence operations, IO, and disinformation across 21 countries, and CFA's media monitoring civic signal team that uses machine learning, AI tools to tackle hate speech and other toxic content. In addition, Justin is founder of the African Digital Democracy Observatory that networks CFA and other similar organizations monitoring for propaganda and hybrid information warfare targeting Africa. We also have Ari Sasmito. He's the co-founder and fact-check specialist of MAFINDO, a non-profit organization combating false information, or a hoax as commonly called in Indonesia, literacy education, and social movements by training and convening with journalists and media, educating consumers of online media, and by building communities of online fact checkers. Then we have Keiso, who's an award-winning investigative journalist with over a decade of experience reporting on general health issues, women and girls empowerment, political party stories, and gender-based violence stories. She started her career in 2009 and has, she started her organization, she started writing, at 23, and has written for local media houses. And she has a national diploma in communication skills and a national diploma in fundamentals of financial sustainability of NGOs with SCIM College of Netherlands, and an honor certificate in media management from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. She is based in Lesotho and is a stinger to media houses in the region, and has written articles for South African media houses such as the Daily Sun, City Press, the Daily Maverick, and the African Independent. Whoa. So we have an amazing lineup, and we also have Salah, who is joining us from Latin America, and he is a tech blogger. So we have a really broad, very, very broad view in terms of our speakers coming from different areas, and I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. So now we're going to open it up to our speakers to each give you have about 5 minutes to talk about your perspective on the war in Ukraine, so your experience of it. Maybe if you can also walk us through sort of the first days when you heard about it as compared to now, where you stand now, how it's impacted you, or how you have seen it impact your region. So let's start, ladies first, if you don't mind. Keiso, the floor is yours. Please may you turn on your video as well. Hi, Aurra. Keiso, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I couldn't say no to this opportunity even when I'm not really feeling well. Actually, I'm from my hospital bed. I just got home yesterday. Thank you so much for having me. And I don't know if it's my gadget, but your volume is very, very low. I couldn't hear you clearly.
I think the rest of us can hear you fine. Both of you guys, we can hear you both strong and clear.
Okay. Getting into what I'm expected to share with you guys. Lesotho is a very, very small country surrounded by South Africa. And when you go abroad, and introduce yourself as coming from Lesotho, people regard it as just a small dot inside South Africa. Our population is 2 million, and our economy depends so much on South Africa. So when we first heard about Ukraine and Russia war, not everyone, everyone from our population knew what Ukraine and Russia war was, and a very few people had interest and understood what was going on. Even today, as I'm talking to you, people don't really understand why food prices are going up and why fuel is going up. So even our law enforcement, we don't really have engagements of our soldiers talking about maybe participating in the war, because we don't really do that as a very small, poor and developing country. So even on our media platforms as journalists in Lesotho, we have not shown I cannot say interest, because when we are at our homes, we watch news, international news, and so that one is up to speed on what is happening in the world. But we have not really exhausted giving news updates to the nation about what Ukraine and Russia war entails and why is it happening, and maybe what is happening on daily basis. So I would say that even though there's a certain portion of our population who know what is happening up there, there has not been, much interest in the nation to really discuss and see how much it is affecting us, because it doesn't matter whether we are a small, poor, developing country or not. For example, cooking oil is so expensive in Lesotho. And we got our fuel prices hiking. We talk about paraffin, talk about petrol and diesel. They are very, very expensive now. And all that has been done by the nation to the government was to make online petitions to say, why is our government not subsidizing those things so that other people who earn low wage can be able to afford such? Because I think it was, yes, this past Friday on the 24th, taxi owners were on the verge of having a strike, saying that fuel is going up so much, but transport fare is still standing on the lower prices. So they increased taxi fare with, I think, 2 rands, because our currency, Maluti, is equivalent to South African rand. So I think people who are low wage earners are more suffering than people who are earning much salaries, because when you look at our economy, it is true that we sometimes claim that we have people who are having a standard life, but from how things are going on the ground, we have people who are poor and who are very rich. We don't necessarily have a standard life. So people who are earning less wages, who are earning low wages, and who are unemployed are really suffering as far as affordability of rent, affordability of transport fare, affordability of food, which are, I think, are our basic needs. So we know about the war. We have been watching TV and listening to radio. People who access internet, like myself and other people, still see updates online. But even though we are affected economic wise, but we don't, I think we are just overlooking the issue, and we don't even know how we can contribute maybe towards towards the war. And it's something that we know, but we don't really I don't think care will be an appropriate word, but we don't really care about it. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
More questions.
Thank you for sharing your perspective. And I think it's reflective of a lot of countries in Africa, especially the smaller countries. And like you're saying, those who maybe don't necessarily have access to the internet, or who only have access to state media, don't really have a lot of details and a lot of information. And so it's really hard to understand something that you don't have information on. So I get where you're coming from, and I appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much, Keiso. And again, get well soon. Thank you so much for making time for us today. And hang on tight. I'm sure some questions will be coming a bit later on. I would like to hand over to Ari. Ari, could you please share your perspective and your findings as well from your side of the world? Maybe just let everyone know which country you're calling from so that we get a better understanding of your side of the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Aurra. Good evening, Jakarta, Indonesia time. If you're not familiar with Indonesia, then Bali, everyone in the world, it is mostly known because Bali is a paradise island. What a lot of people don't know is that Bali is just one of the cities of Indonesia islands. Let me share my screen. Yes.
Ari, we cannot hear you so well.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Does it sound okay now?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, let me start the timer to make sure that I'm not going past 5 minutes. Okay, so thank you Design Global for again inviting me. This is actually good to see you guys again. It's pretty much almost the same situation like the previous speaker said, but in Indonesia, because we are non-block nation, from political aspect, the conflict between Ukraine versus Russia not really have any significant impact to us, to Indonesia politically. And although the government is pushing for peace resolution, which has caused them to be criticized as being pragmatic, fence-sitter, and etc., it is clear that in social media the public support goes to Russia. The narrative, most of them have a typical theme. Typically, it's defending one side by degrading the opposite side, attacking them using certain narratives. Highlighting the effect of war to trigger emotional response. This is something typical. Usually, by driving people to be emotional, it's easier for them to get them to spread the false information because no matter how smart they are overtaken by their emotion, specifically anger and fear. And last but not least, this is usually for kids and those who watch too many war movies. They actually admire war and weapons. Like the previous speaker said, that there's a factor that because it doesn't happen directly to them, so the social media feel that war is cool, weapons are something that should be admired. And at the moment, I'm sure everybody understands that social media platforms, although there are several options, TikTok is very popular. Therefore, the platform and videos, along with false claim, dominate the narratives. Some of them are. It's easier for me to talk through using example of my fact check. The claim said that this is the Ukrainian Health Ministry staged the war victim coverage video. This is of course a false claim because the fact the video is footage from the report on demo against climate policy. It has nothing to do with it happens in Vienna. It has nothing to do with Ukraine or Russia. Next example, the false claim saying that the destruction of Ukraine's vital object. But the fact is, this is actually coming from the movie The War of the Worlds. This is a video set. Specifically, it's on. This is appear a few minutes during the scene of the plane crash. Next, the false claim is saying that, oh, this is so horrible, but it's not exactly mentioning anything about Ukraine or Russia, but by adding the hashtag war and the hashtag trending, this is the strategy that commonly called as riding the wave, because this is triggering people reaction to connect this to make relationship with the current situation between Ukraine and Russia. So it doesn't necessarily mention Ukraine and Russia, but using the hashtag technique, this can be also popular among other videos. But the fact is, the video was actually previously appeared in 2019. It has no connection, no relationship with what happened in 2020 in the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is the launch video of the multiple launch rocket system by the land forces of the Qatar. And again, emotion, it is proven to be one of the most effective way. The claim said that this makes me want to cry, and it's not all Russian soldiers, it's Putin, he's a dictator and evil man. This is to trigger the emotional response. The fact is, this is a 2021 video. It happened in Syria, so obviously that it has no relationship. It's not connected to the situation between Ukraine and Russia. So thank you for the 5 minutes. Let's continue at the discussion session. Usually after a presentation, it is standard for people to ask for the slide. Therefore, I'm providing the slide in the URL that I provide in the link. And also, please do, if you have time, bit.ly/Aribowo Sasmito is the URL that you can use to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ari. That was really eye-opening. I think the one that caught me by surprise the most was the one from the movie of War in the Worlds, that people basically, what we would, I would say as youth, I'd like to consider myself still young, what we as youth would call just chasing clout, just basically looking for likes and retweets and activating people's emotions. So that's really interesting to see from your neck of the woods. Justin, I've been watching you and you've been nodding and smiling, and I feel like a lot of what Ari shared in his presentation also sort of resonated with you, and I'm interested to know what your perspective is. So Justin, please take the floor.
Thanks very much. I'm going to share my screen, but you kind of very right. A lot of what Ari was saying, kind of we see the very similar kind of phenomena in Africa. So just very quickly, what we are seeing here is a bit of a shadow war. There are very, very specific influence operations and coordinated disinformation that we're seeing across the continent. So just very quickly again, my name's Justin. I had COVID and so my hair fell out, but this was an old picture I haven't updated yet. I'll get around to doing that for the next one. I'm a former journalist. I currently work with a civic tech organization, and I'm easy to reach on all of the social media. The organization I work with is a non-profit across quite a large kind of band of Africa. Everything in dark blue there is we've got full-time in-country analysts or researchers and staff. The red dots are our larger offices. The light blue bands are where we also work through additional partners. We do everything from sensors through data, through a lot of data analysis, through to drones and so on. So the intel or the information that we pull together comes from multiple sources, including lots of media partners. And we synthesize all of that into quite deep analysis. We do this through something called a kind of observatory, which is ourselves and a whole bunch of other forensic research organizations, many of them focused on this disinformation space. Some of them non-profit, but also a lot of them are for-profit, so risk advisories and those kinds of organizations. And then we have a network of roughly about 247 newsrooms that we support to do misinformation and debunking across the continent. So think of all of these kind of hub and spoke partners as an early warning or an early listening system that feeds kind of signals to us. We don't just look at the content and kind of very explicit attempts at trying to shape people's opinions. We try and understand the economy that lies underneath this disinformation, because disinformation is profitable. And then I'm not sure, the video, that's why. And then we also work with the disinformation work is with the Global Disinformation Index. We've got a very robust model for researching this stuff. With Oxford University's Reuters Institute, we also then look at audience trust. So that's the background. And sorry, I just want to kill that video because there's no time for it. That's the background. What are we seeing, and how has Ukraine shaped kind of public opinion across Africa? Well, firstly, it's led to a massive kind of shift in loyalties and opinions. This map here is a map of the original vote in the UN that censured Russia for invading Ukraine. This is when we said, you guys are bad, you know, that there's a problem. But even in this vote, you'll see that all the ones in dark blue abstained from voting, all the ones in pink and red voted against the move in some parts. So only the countries in blue there actually stood up and said, Russia, you're doing very bad stuff. The rest of these countries either said, we will refuse to have an opinion, or we are not going to vote, meaning that we didn't even turn up for the votes to avoid opinion. Or in the case of Eritrea, they voted against the censure. That changed to an even worse scenario when the UN voted to censure or suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. And over here, you can see that only the ones in blue, light blue, were the ones that now still voted in favor of the global north, saying, Russia, you are being bad. Everyone on this map in red, gray, or kind of dark blue voted in some way that favored Russia, that kind of came out on Russia's side. And as you can see from that map, it includes all the largest economies on the continent and many of the kind of more important political kind of leaders or role players. So just in the space of that first UN vote until the second one, already there was the beginnings of a seismic shift in public opinion. Much of this was kind of initially driven by public opinion, specifically where we saw what appeared to be racial discrimination against Africans who were trapped in Ukraine and who were trying to leave, either being denied access on trains or kind of being stopped at the borders. And then there was a very damaging disinformation campaign on Telegram, where a whole bunch of alt-right kind of racist right-wingers from Europe and from North America tried to trick Africans to put on yellow armbands and walk into combat zones towards the Russian lines so that they'd be machine gunned. And there were multiple of these channels. This didn't sit well with when it was reported in Africa, and there was a groundswell of of responses against that. In addition, as you can see from this map, this is the map of all disinformation and fact-checking organizations in the world, and where they're debunking misinformation relating to the Ukraine war, both pro and kind of anti Russia and Ukraine, so all sides of the conflict. You can see that there's a growing amount of targeted misinformation in Africa itself around the issue. Much of this is led by changing opinion in mainstream African media, where increasingly opinion pages are being used by pundits, influencers, and by Russian state media to put their side of what they believe the situation to be in a very coordinated, very kind of explicit way. And it's starting to have an impact. We see it starting to shape online conversation and discussion. In fact, we're even starting to see the very first African volunteers fighting on Russia's side against Ukraine. So they're volunteering out of places like the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, and so forth, against Ukraine and against NATO. In addition, we're seeing that there's an accelerated drive as a result of the Ukrainian war for Chinese and for Russian disinformation platforms to convert people from open social, from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and elsewhere, onto dark social, where it's very, very difficult for conversations and for groups and kind of coordination to be monitored. And TikTok is fast emerging as something that is almost uncheckable or unstoppable as a place for fast spread of memes and tropes and disinformation relating to the war. But potentially most interestingly, we've seen for the first time that we've been monitoring this, a very close coordination between Russian narratives and Russian talking points suddenly being echoed verbatim right down to the same infographics on Chinese kind of distribution or information systems across the continent. So you're starting to see this lockstep of kind of propaganda that we didn't see previously. Even during COVID, there were very similar kind of allegiances, but seeing a lot more what appears to be coordination across the continent. So we don't have much time, but very quickly, just a couple of points that I want to stress. The first thing that we need to understand is that firstly, the Ukraine war didn't set any of this off, didn't spark it. There's been growing Russian penetration into information spaces and kind of a geopolitical game in Africa for at least the last 2 to 3 years. China has been kind of involved in for a far longer period. And they're doing it because it's becoming increasingly cost effective and easy to do so, because disinformation is profitable. There is an economy that enables this. In fact, Twitter and others say that Kenya and Nigeria are the world leaders in how to kind of young entrepreneurs sitting in kind of in their garages or kind of home workspaces who are figuring out how to game the platforms and get around the automatic controls. Secondly, like kind of we heard from Indonesia, the global south are merely kind of pawn, a larger power game between the great powers, if you want, using an old colonial term. But it's a turf war between Russia, China, and North America, and to some extent, increasingly Europe, especially where it concerns France, that we're starting to see play out almost like in the Cold War in many of our countries. So this is a map of just identified disinformation programs just by Russia in Africa in the last 18 months by a US think tank. We're also seeing this kind of, as I said, this growing kind of alignment between Russia and China's relationship. For example, Russia today was taken off the airwaves across Africa to remove state media after the Ukrainian war. But very recently, Starlink, which is a Chinese StarSat at least, which is a Chinese satellite rebroadcaster, has now kind of brought them back online. And based out of South Africa, the Africa News Agency has again started to distribute a lot of Russian state media content. A lot of this is building on known red button issues in Africa, everything from jihad insurgency through to COVID and vaccine hesitancy and other key issues that they can use to frame Russia and to some extent China as a new player that doesn't come with colonial baggage. And increasingly, we're seeing Russia very explicitly use religion and its role as a defender of the faith and as an Orthodox, kind of an early Orthodox pioneer, kind of having Christianity ahead of many in the West, as a political weapon. These pictures are from Ethiopia, where there's increasing alignment between the Russian Orthodox Church and Orthodox churches across Africa. We've seen the same thing play out in place in Eastern Europe, in Georgia, Romania, and elsewhere. So it's not new, but we're seeing now a repeat of those strategies across the rest of the region. And for the first time, strategies that we saw Russia carry out in places like Syria, we're now starting to see in Central African Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso, and elsewhere, where building of statues to Russian warrior heroes is also starting to make big inroads alongside other kinds of offline influence operations. So just very quickly, food aid has been weaponized, and entertainment, which is one I'll skip to now to give you a quick example. But we're seeing discrete kind of strategies around imitating the media, co-opting the media, creating media factories, which means very large production units, largely in Kenya. We're seeing a lot of media laundering. We're seeing subversion of the media, where Russian intelligence agencies are now pretending to be PR agencies and are actually recruiting otherwise legitimate African journalists and media as freelancers without them understanding that they're working for an intelligence agency. We're seeing Russian, the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, selling off-the-shelf disinformation infrastructure to local political parties across Africa. And we're even seeing in countries like the Central African Republic, where the president's own Facebook group is managed directly from Russia. So we're starting to see direct management of political infrastructure in many of these client countries. But the bit that I do want to stress, because we're not seeing much of this in elsewhere of the world, is that Russia has adopted a very interesting strategy in Africa, where it is producing Netflix quality, full-length blockbuster action movies, with Russian mercenaries as the Euros, fighting insurgent jihadists in Mozambique, Central African Republic, Libya, and so forth. And this now also plays out, and I'll kill the sound, into made for video, made for viral media. So in other words, Instagram and elsewhere, animated video that is directly targeted at the youth, that again kind of frames the insurgents as zombies, but it kind of frames the Euros as kind of avenging angels. And there's a little bit further in this movie where Wagner soldiers actually come down as avenging angels to save Africans. It's going at scale. And alongside that, we're even seeing kind of very satirical things. This is something out of Mali a couple of weeks ago, where Russians are now also turning the kind of the tables on jihadists, machine gunning them. And then, as you see, he rips down the flag, saying that behind jihadists are America and Europe and the West. And these videos end with quite explicit kind of this, he's saying here, Russians never surrender, you cannot destroy us. And it ends with Wagner, this big thing about saying, use us, we the Euros. These videos are viewed millions and millions of times. Wagner is the same mercenary group behind Bucha in Ukraine. So we're seeing the building of a narrative here that is an alternative version of the story that you hear in Western and North American media, and it is gaining massive traction in Africa. We've got more examples, but run out of time, including how the content is distributed on an industrial scale and amplified artificially so that it gets widely viewed. It's not just organic. There's a whole kind of machinery behind making sure that this message gets out. With that, back to you.
Wow, that blew me away personally. So much information. For those of you who maybe joined halfway, I saw a few people joining through halfway. Justin, if I could ask you to please share your link again to your presentation. I know you shared it a bit earlier on in the chat. It was before quite a few people had joined the meeting. Definitely something worth looking at. Very eye-opening, interesting take on them using things like food aid, using that, weaponizing food aid, especially now since, Africa Day this year, the focus was, the year of alleviating hunger. The whole story this year has been about hunger in Africa. So, they seem to be using every trick in the book, as well as the media. I was unaware of the productions that are happening. So very interesting perspective. Thank you so much for sharing so much content and research with us, Justin. And I think we're probably going to get quite a few questions on that as well. I'm now going to ask Mo. Mo, are you still with us?
Hey, hi, I'm here.
Hi, Mo. Sorry, I did make a mistake earlier on. I'd said you're from Latin America, and that's incorrect. You're from the MENA region, which is Middle East and North Africa, yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right, awesome. So Mo, please share with us your perspective and what's going on in your neck of the woods, and maybe also tell us which country exactly you are calling in from.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. Basically, when the war started, I was traveling between the United Arab Emirates and the United States. So I spent most of the first 2 months of the war in the United States, and that's without a doubt have had me only getting one side of the story. But at the end of the day, the Russian side of the story, from a personal perspective, is very hard to be obtained right now in an independent form of journalism, because I think every independent journalist I know in Russia is no longer writing or in jail or outside Russia. So I don't think I personally have a way to obtain the Russian story in a way that is not by state-owned agency or something. In general, the MENA region is extremely complex, and the United States and Russia too, both have different ways of involvement. And in Africa, things are a lot different. Food, religion, and economy would play a huge role. But in MENA, there is so many other things to be played. Let's start with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which basically put automatically so many Arabs against the United States, whatever the case is. And I wouldn't say it's hate toward the United States, but it's just like disagreement all the way with the United States. Because also the United States is responsible for a lot of shit in Iraq, are responsible for a lot of conflict in Syria, and a lot of conflict in Lebanon, and a lot of conflict in other places, same as the Russians. So the Russians are mainly controlling Syria as we speak. And whatever you guys are seeing in Ukraine, we have been telling the world for 10 years, this is the way Russia do war. And this is the way Russia, when Russia will invade a country, will actually do. And this is the ways they use certain weapons and certain strategies. So right now you have everyone who's, I wouldn't say against the United States, but disagree with the United States on everything that has to do with Palestine or has to do with the region, foreign policy in general. They're 100% in the Russian camp, defending Russia, and they don't need fake news or they don't need any media coming from anywhere else in the world. They're volunteering to defend the Russian Russian status when it's come to the war, despite the fact they're disagreeing with the United States because supporting Israel, which is considered an occupation to Israel, to Palestine, sorry, but they're very much supporting the same thing, but in the other way around, just basically because they're in disagreement with the United States. That's a complex, that's a narrative. And then the other narrative you have is people who are being fed all day media that is owned by authoritarian regimes around the region that basically hate all the Western values. And that's also another way of just disagreeing with the United States all the way. And then you have another narrative, which is basically the ones who are extremely disappointed by the European countries' reaction to over than 5 million refugees from Ukraine versus less than 500,000 Syrians, and the way that those Syrians were treated with a lot of racism and a lot of beating up and a lot of refusal to enter the European Union. So mainly you have three groups who are not necessarily with Russia, but they're literally volunteering to defend Russia because they're basically disagree with the United States and the Western side of Europe. And then other than that, you have the politicians' narrative, which is we have no interest in picking a fight with Russia, and we're not gaining anything out of a democratic president in the United States. So if Trump, for an example, is the president of the United States right now, most of Arab countries politically would have reacted a lot differently than today. But today, they are not gaining any political power or influence, and they're not anyway happy with the relationship with the United States. So they have no point of pissing off Russia, especially when most of Russian billionaires, technically speaking, moving to a couple of countries in our region, like Turkey and the United Arab Emirates, for several reasons. So politicians have no point to stand by the United States. Most of the society have also no point to do that. The liberal community and the left community in the Middle East, which is not considered a majority in any way in any country, are the only, I would say, group of people who are 100% either by the West narrative of the story, or like this is an invasion to a country and we should be standing against, and that would make sense. But in general, it's like every case in the Middle East, it's complex and would carry in between the lines many other things that have historical, I would say, impact or influence on what's happening today.
Thank you so much. No, please carry on, Aisha. Aisha, please step in and share your thoughts, and I think drive us into question time as well.
Yeah, I wanted to firstly thank Mo for joining us. He is perhaps one of the best political thinkers I know, and has, I think, a very interesting perspective, Mo, because he works with so many people kind of both in the West and throughout the region on entrepreneurship and all kinds of matters. So I think Mo really, and I want to talk with you a little bit, you really reflect my experience here. And I was having a discussion with a friend just yesterday about the war in Ukraine, and it came to me that I don't know how the US view can possibly have credibility in the region we're in, whether or not the war is wrong. Like, we went to a war in Iraq based on false premises, and Iraq is a neighbor to Jordan and Lebanon, right? And there's sort of no ground you have to stand on, and I have no idea how the any view on the Ukraine that's shared by like most Western powers will ever make any headway. And I can see, actually, I think you're exactly right. I don't think disinformation is necessary. I think how Europe treated the Syrians was more than enough. But I guess I'd like to press you further on that. Is there any place where you see a difference in credibility between Russian narratives about the conflict and Western narratives about the conflict? They seem equally credible to many people I meet here.
I don't think it's a matter of narratives in MENA. We're beyond that point. I don't think people in the region believes Russia or the United States. I don't think Arabs are into that narrative or that narratives. Both. They're just for a group of Arabs, Russia is the country is responsible of destroying multiple countries in the region, directly or indirectly. And for another group, the United States is responsible for destroying other countries in the region. Whether both narratives or both opinions are right or wrong. Firstly, there is no Russian media in MENA other than Russia Today. And Russia Today is labeled across the world as a state-owned institution. But the issue, I would say, why the US narrative is not going through, which it should go through, because at the end of the day, when there is no conflict, Arabs will automatically be lenient toward the world, the Western, not only narrative, but lifestyle, everything, media, entertainment, whatever. And we don't really watch Russian movies or listen to Russian music or even Chinese. Like everything we're consuming from products to entertainment to news is very much American. The thing is, when you look at the coverage of the news from BBC, Sky, CNN, Bloomberg, all these guys have MENA region branches. The media they're producing within the current political landscape have nothing to do with what they're actually producing back home or in other regions in the world. BBC is considered an extreme conservative media outlet in our region, guys. I know it can be funny, but if you read CNN in the Middle East in Arabic, you mostly consider them Fox News in the best case scenario, like they can be worse. And they're covering the stories in a way that would please certain people in the region. So at the end of the day, the American story and the American narrative in the West, or maybe in Africa or Asia, are not getting to us in the same way. If you look at, for example, what the Supreme Court just did with abortion laws, that story is not covered at all by Western, American, and European media in the region at all, because they have no interest in actually covering the story in a liberal way. But it doesn't work for them here. So I think the American media is not doing its role. The Russians do not need any misinformation or very much of help, because they already have a huge audience that already disagree with the United States, no matter who's on the other side. And this disagreement is coming from the United States stand on not only on political cases, by the way, but the way the United States is standing on the LGBT community, or standing on women's rights, or standing on several civil rights.
I think that's all very well said. I'm supposed to take us into questions. Let's see. So we have Mitchell Pullman. There's a great deal of discussion here about Russia and the USA, but none at all about Ukraine. Good point. But a question I'd ask back is, isn't it inevitable that most places that aren't Europe are going to see this as a Russia-Ukraine conflict? And why has that, how could the narrative have been handled so that it highlighted Ukraine and not the quote unquote great power thing? Ukraine has trained many of the developing world's doctors. Pre-war Kharkiv was filled with African medical students. True, half the UN World Food Program food is from Ukraine. So shouldn't all this be a part of the discussion in the developing world? That's a great question, but I guess I'm going to say and I'll ask Mo and Aribowo and Keiso, are you still here? And Justin, what would you say to that?
So I'll jump in and take a stab at it and then everyone else. As I just said in text, I think that's really important, is that I think Russia is, at least in Africa and in the parts of kind of the surrounding region that we also focus on, Russia is being very savvy about how it frames these conversations. So it's coming to Africa, and we've seen the same thing through colleagues that we work with in India and in places like Yemen. And it's saying that we are not colonialists. We never had the colonial empire. We never did slavery. We come to you with clean hands. And as the Soviet Union, we're the ones who helped you fight against colonialism, and we helped you kind of achieve liberation. What they're not saying is that although they were not colonial, they were an empire, and they literally kind of conquered the whole of a whole great part of Asia and Eurasia that they had until kind of very recently, rather than slaves. So it's an issue of framing. And they also neglecting to say that the USSR included Ukraine. It wasn't just Russia, that Ukraine was a big and important part of the USSR, of the Soviet Union. So it's an issue of narratives and focusing and shaping where the conversation goes. And they're winning that game at the moment because no one is offering a counter narrative. What we've seen NATO and Europe and the US do very well in Ukraine is deflate the disinformation game, the information war that's happening in Ukraine, by pre-bunking or getting ahead of the conversation and saying this narrative about neo-Nazism or this narrative about genocide, this is where it's going to go next. And they're explaining and effectively neutralizing these information operations that are happening in Ukraine itself. We're not seeing that level of sophistication for the same operations that are happening in Africa. So for example, at the moment, Russia is pushing very strong narratives about food prices, as you heard from Lesotho and elsewhere, and who's to blame for that. They're suggesting, and they've just made an $8 million wheat delivery to Sudan. They're suggesting that this food aid, much of which includes wheat that was looted from Ukraine, are friendship gifts to countries that they are friendly with in Africa. And they're suggesting that they're a better security partner than Europe has been because they put feet on the ground and they're not prepared to, they are prepared to take riskier kind of security steps in places like Mali or Burkina Faso, where they're fighting insurgencies, Central African Republic and Sudan, and even Mozambique for that matter. So I think that there is a larger war playing out here, just in response to Mitchell's comment about Ukraine. And until Europe, North America, and the rest of the West understand that, they're not going to really get engagement from us Africans, because why are we not talking about Yemen? Why are we not talking about Ethiopia and other large-scale wars? Are we only focused on Ukraine because it's light-skinned people who are at play?
Really well said, Justin. And let's see, I'm just looking for other questions here. There's a lot of statements. There's not that many questions.
I would like to ask a question to the whole of the speaker. What about disinformation on the digital space? What are, you have mentioned, in all of you have mentioned actually and discussed the issue of disinformation in digital space. To what extent do you think that it influences and how it impacts, and what are the different channels used across regions? Thank you.
May I take the question? Yeah, in
Yes.
Indonesia, at least, like Justin said, social media has become not just on the issue of Ukraine, but also during day-to-day political situation in Indonesia. Social media, every platform. So sometimes it is started in open and people copying, pasting in closed social media like WhatsApp or Telegram group. Sometimes it's the other way around. So there were people who said that one of the strategy, one of the tactics of not to be discovered as the first person who made the false information is by spreading it through closed social media, like WhatsApp, for example. WhatsApp is really popular in Indonesia, and then from closed social media platform, just let it distributed in other WhatsApp groups, because in WhatsApp it's difficult to actually find the first person who made the false narrative, and the only way to tell if it's viral in Facebook would be there's a notifications label saying that shared many times, forwarded many times. So it's actually strategy quite clever of people who's hiding from close to social media. But typically any issue that being coverage as a hot issue by the media, the twisted or the false fact or the misinformation version will also be distributed in social media. So the correct version in authoritative and media, standard media, false information in social media. So it is safe to say that let's not focus just on one social media. It is true that TikTok currently is one of the popular, but something that coming from TikTok is also usually shared in other platforms. And yeah, it's difficult to again to actually pinpoint the first person who's doing it, because although a lot of studies like Justin presented later, the social network analysis also displayed it's difficult to actually able to find the first person who made the false information. Even the bot network and the what do you call it, the Indonesian would usually call it the intellectual actor, or the one who's actually mastermind behind this. It is extremely difficult to be able to find them. Therefore, previously I think Justin also mentioned about pre-banking. Pre-banking is very important, and the chat I'm seeing in the chat section saying that influencers also need to talk about this, because at least in Indonesia, people are actually doing this not necessarily for the purpose of using social media for the purpose of weaponization and what do you call it, for the profit, but it is the least of the problem is that a lot of people are easily spreading false information, and the only motivational is that they want to be popular, they want to be known by their friends, their families, and there are no other motivational reason. So it's not necessarily the mastermind behind false information that largely distributed is bot network or for the commercial reason, but sometimes youngsters, he or she just want to be popular. It actually is that version. I mean, because the war doesn't actually happen to the Indonesia social media users, that there's a lack of empathy. Those who are actually using the current trend situation, which is Ukraine war, to become popular, and not thinking about the victims, and not unable to understand that no matter who's winning or losing, it is always the civilians that will become the victim. Thank you, Nico.
Thank you, Ari. Justin Mo? You get some
Yes.
things in the chat room, but
Yeah, so I think for us, what is most interesting is that disinformation on social media was something that was always conducted directly by intelligence agencies. And I mean, we must not be mistaken about the fact that this is just Russia and China. France has proven repeatedly that they are very clumsy, but they also conduct disinformation campaigns. The US, even Canada, does information campaigns on the internet. So it's not just Russia. But for us, what's super interesting is that in the past, these disinformation campaigns were always conducted directly by an intelligence agency. And what Russia's done over the last 18 months or so is that they've figured out the McDonald's model. They figured out that the way you scale globally and also how you sidestep kind of localization, which is the big challenge. In other words, content in vernacular languages that kind of resonate and kind of refer to the local context. The way you get around that challenge is not by having a massive team sitting in St. Petersburg at the Internet Research Agency trying to do it, is that you franchise it out to local operators who do it on your behalf. And so what we've seen Russia doing very successfully is they've been tapping into these large-scale organized crime networks on social media. The people who service you quick get rich quick schemes and who send you kind of COVID hesitancy kind of conspiracy theories and 5G is going to fry your brain type of stuff. They've built massive audiences. They give them salacious content or content that people click on because they know how to push people's buttons. And they've got the machinery to produce that content at scale. And Russia's been very good at tapping into that infrastructure and turning it into an economy. That means that suddenly a small team sitting in St. Petersburg has massive global reach at grassroots level in multiple languages, often beyond the reach of the platforms. Their algorithms simply can't do natural language processing and understand many of these languages because they can only do Swahili and kind of Yoruba and then all the international languages. They go no further down than that. So it's basically invisible. And why do the criminal operators want to do this? Because it helps them keep their own platforms flexible. So they build a platform that is 1 minute servicing people with COVID kind of conspiracies, the next minute with religious kind of propaganda, and then kind of pro-Russian content. The algorithm gets so confused about what is this kind of network doing that it starts looking like the random behavior of real people. And then increasingly, they've also got very good at not just having bots running these networks, it's real people running these networks on co-managed accounts. As you've seen in some of our slides, we were given examples of them. And so it is real humans and they're not bots, which means that the platforms don't trigger that for a takedown. And then the third thing is that the platforms use something called coordinated inauthentic behavior as the trigger point to take down a disinformation platform. And Russia has figured out how to do coordinated behavior. So they coordinate amplification and sharing of content, but it's not inauthentic. And so the platforms can't take down these networks because then it would break their own rules of freedom of association and freedom of speech. So we've seen Russia evolve very clever countermeasures, almost quicker than what the platforms and civil society and human rights groups are kind of developing to monitor the stuff to stay ahead of the game. And if they're evolving faster than the countermeasures are at the moment. So I think that for us has been super interesting. The war in Ukraine has sped that up, and particularly it's sped up the move from open social to dark social, where they're converting people from Facebook and Instagram onto platforms like WhatsApp, where you can't use algorithms to track people and you can't map the relationships. And then in addition to that, as I pointed out in the slides, they're using very slick content to target people who don't have their news filters on. They're targeting people with entertainment content when you're relaxed and your brain is more receptive because you're in suspended belief mode, and they're hitting you with things about, Wagner soldiers are heroes, and like anyone who's against us is a zombie. It's like that's how crude the messaging is. but it has a cumulative effect when you get that over and over again. Sorry, I've spoken a lot, but I think those strategies are what we should be focusing on. It's the playbooks that are important, rather than kind of whack-a-mole trying to kill every piece of content. Is we need to understand what the back-end tactics and techniques are, otherwise we'll never be able to neutralize any of the stuff.
Thank you. Keiso, and before we move to Mo and change the region, Keiso, do you want to add something, because you have written something in the chat too? Okay, then let's move to Mo. Mo?
No. Okay, so for misinformation, the thing is, in MENA, there's another layer of complexity, which is the nature of the Arabic language. And the fact that most of the media is, not most of the media, almost all the media is either 100% state-owned or 100%, in a way or another, state-controlled. There is some independent media. I wouldn't say it's an independent media. It's more of an underground media, because none of it is major. None of it is consumed by anywhere near the mass. This media is very elite, and it's usually discussing topics that even does not concern the mass. And they're focused on civil rights, human rights, I would say liberal values. So in terms of social media being used for misinformation, it's a nightmare. And whatever the narrative is, like you would see media outlets publishing literally not fake news that have any basis, but lies, like literally speaking, like it's a narrative that does not exist. It's a story that does not exist. But because Facebook is not concerned, and by the way, Facebook is the internet in the Middle East. If you're comparing to Europe or comparing to the United States or Latin America or anywhere in the world, maybe only Latin America have average time usage of Facebook specifically anywhere near the Middle East. So in most countries in the region, at least 50 to 70% of the nation, the whole nation, is already on Facebook. And if they're not on Facebook as a platform, they're on Instagram and they're on WhatsApp. And the majority are on the three of it. So forwarding news on WhatsApp is a thing, and especially within families. Instagram is out there, Facebook is out there, and everything is in Arabic. And if you're in tech, you know how hard to control or to oversee anything is done in Arabic, because the machine just simply don't understand it. And all on top of that, the machine doesn't care. Facebook and other social media platforms literally not only don't care to fact check stuff, but they actually even don't care if you're targeted with hate or you're targeted with false news, even to take it down. They don't have the resources in place. They're not facing any pressure from the community or from the governments to actually look into whatever. And they're not losing users. Actually, they're gaining more users. So the current situation looks amazing. Facebook have a monopoly over social media platform, apart from one form, which is short videos, where they're having competition with TikTok. And TikTok is very much a Gen Z tool until we speak. So if we're talking about everyone who possibly can take a decision that could influence anything in the economy, on the political landscape, or socially, all these people are on Facebook. And I don't want to say the majority of them don't care, but they don't have reasons to care. So if they care for a personal interest. But on daily basis, most of Arabs are not affected by correcting or changing any form of, they have their own narratives anyway. So the government can, yeah. Okay, so what I was saying, misinformation works in a different way in the Middle East. It does not need Facebook, but Facebook is an amazing distribution tool. And Facebook is not pressured in any way to do anything about that. Actually, most of the outlets that publish, I wouldn't say fake news, but publishing hate speech, I would say, are verified by Facebook. And I know a few people who are part of Facebook creator programs and part of Facebook other programs, just publishing hate toward women and toward the LGBT community and racism content toward different groups in the society nonstop. And literally Facebook does not care because they don't have much of their auto checking machines up and running here. And also when you report it, they don't care. So the other day, which is, I'm just gonna say a very weird example here, Facebook responded to me on a case that was targeting me personally. Like someone have my profile picture and have my picture and cursing at me in a post and have over than 50 people just cursing at me on his account. Facebook said your opinion is a matter of a public opinion. And we know what these guys are doing is not safe. But unfortunately, we cannot find the balance between freedom of speech and hate toward you, literally speak, in an email. So this is how the situation looked like in MENA.
Thank you. Aisha, Aurra.
Thank you so much, Mo. I think this has been such an eye-opening discussion and honestly, such a different discussion. I don't think we've really I haven't seen a lot of discussions like these happening, really honest and sort of not trying to really push any agenda, but just trying to hear what everyone has to say and just paint the reality of what's really on the ground, as I would say, from the outside looking in. We are unfortunately running out of time. So we're going to start wrapping up, although I've just seen an extra question in the chat. So I will ask it, but then I will ask it's directed to Mo. If Mo, you could probably answer it in your closing remarks. Keiso, I think maybe was having a bit of connectivity issues. So I'm going to read what she wrote in the group, unless Keiso, you're able to speak. Okay, so I'll take that as a maybe not now. So Keiso said another issue that I missed to mention that is triggered by what Justin has said, that no one wants to put themselves at risk in that the future of African students who studied in Ukraine don't want to go back, and their future hangs in balance because first they have to deal with trauma before they decide on what to do next. And Justin also jumped in and says, that the way those students were treated when they were fleeing the war was weaponized. And as an example of how racist the West is, the other thing that Russia is going at scale at the moment is pointing out that most Africans don't need a visa to go to Russia compared to the nightmare of Schengen visas Africans face going to Europe. Russia is also ramping up its sponsorship for African students who want to study in Russia and is offering knowledge exchanges for artists, journalists, creators, and so on across West Africa. And what we find super interesting is the recent growth of VK, the Russian version of Facebook in Africa. It has gone from 0% in most places to 6% in Francophone Africa. And that's still quite tiny, but it is a noteworthy spurt. Sorry about that. So yes, very, very eye-opening discussion. And we're going to start wrapping up now. So Keiso, if your mic is not working, if you're not able to speak at the moment, please just let me know in my chat directly. If not, I will likely go back to Mo. Mo, I'm going to ask the question and then you can give us your closing remarks and also answer the question. This is coming from Nathaniel. He says, what source does Mo like for finding numbers on social media users? Is it Facebook itself, social bakers, or what instrument? Also, some research shows that news sites like Yom7, also RT3 get a lot of shares, yes or no? So Mo, if you can give us your closing remarks, what your take homes from this discussion, as well as answering the question that's been asked. And then after Mo, we'll just jump straight into Justin, if that's all right.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to answer the first part first. In terms of numbers on social media users in MENA, mostly the most prominent numbers and the most accurate ones comes from We Are Social, the Singaporean organization. The MENA region is usually very underserved, very much underserved when it's come to insights and numbers for several reasons. And there's not much coming from the platforms itself. Google would publish a very, very narrow and honestly very unhelpful data when it's come to the Middle East, very not detailed in any way. Facebook is the same. They would share some extra information with some of their business partner, but it's still very, for several reasons. One of it is how much technology is deployed. So if you want to have data for all countries across the region, I would invite you to go to We Are Social. They have their annual report. Unfortunately, you cannot have this data updated all over the year. You only get it in January. That's the best place you can get get numbers on MENA. In terms of major publications in MENA or sites where people visit for news, I would say the regional media channels are the most consumed. Would say right now Al Jazeera is heavily consumed, and it's Al Jazeera where I live is a lot different from Al Jazeera where maybe all of you guys know. Al Jazeera where you guys, especially in the West, is a very center leaning toward liberal an outlet. It's a racism, terrorism promoting machine here, and the country where it operates is mostly where all these groups are funded, and they actually lives there. So it's a lot different. And then you have Sky News, and you have Al Arabiya, and you have I would say Al-Sharq by Bloomberg. That's a Bloomberg affiliate that is based out of Saudi. I would say these are in general the most consumed. If you're looking into business related or tech related information, Shark will be your destination. So as I said, it's a Bloomberg affiliate. Locally, I would say every country would have a couple of 2 to 3 state-owned publications that were mainly distributing the news, but they're more than distributor than publishers. They don't do investigation reports. They don't do much of reporting. They will just they're basically publishing news. The other entities I mentioned, which is all of it are regional, are the ones basically producing the news. And even on local level, in a lot of breaking news, they will be the first to break the news before even the local entities. What I take from this conversation is this information and maybe the internet where I started. I'm a bit young, not very, but I'm a bit. And when I started working in the tech field and I went to university because of my love for the internet and my love for the technology, I thought technology will accelerate democracy. I thought technology would be the thing will help me see many of human rights values or the values I believe in spread around the world. Unfortunately, technology today is the main reason why the main threat I see for democracy and the main threat I see for any good value we have in this world. And the way technology is being utilized in certain countries, including countries that claim to be democratic and claim to care for human rights, is insanely sad. And hearing that Canada is also doing misinformation is very, very, very sad. Honestly, like it's shocking. And it's annoying at the same time, because if Canada is doing this, I don't think I can blame anyone else in the world for doing it. I know we're short on time, so I'll just let the other speakers go ahead with their.
Thank you, Mo. Justin?
Sorry, I didn't realize my mic was on. So I think my takeaway is that we need to be sharing a lot more information between ourselves. So, I mean, Ari, I would love to chat to you and Mo, playbooks, watch lists, lexicons that we use for our monitoring to see if there's coordination across these regions. It might not be the same actors, but it might definitely be kind of, you know, the strategies that they test in one place, they then reuse elsewhere. A lot of our monitoring was built on what we saw being done in Syria, and then how that was kind of applied to Sudan and tweaked and then kind of used in other countries. I think at a monitoring level, we need to get kind of better at sharing the technical information outside of academia, kind of amongst frontline monitors and analysts, because then we'll become better at it. So, I mean, yeah, I think, Nico, if there's something you guys want to do, that kind of coordination and kind of knowledge exchange, exactly. I think it would be crucial. No one's doing it. So, and then that takes me into an anecdote. My point about visas is, you know, Europe and America are doing themselves harm by treating us from the South as enemies. I'm sitting in Oslo at the moment, and the global fact-checking community met here. All of my East African colleagues from PesaCheck, our fact-checking team, got visas from the night the conference started, so the night before, and they had to leave immediately after the last session to go to the airport because their visa ended that night. No extra days at all. And in fact, they in transit through Schiphol and through kind of Frankfurt, they get interrogated, they have to carry their documents with them. You treat people like the enemy and they'll become the enemy. 2 weeks ago, there was the global disinformation.
Just consider Greece next time instead of Oslo.
I love Greece. I actually lived in Istanbul for many years. So Greece would be great. Brussels 2 weeks ago, the global disinformation kind of gathering called 360 Open. They invited 93 African analysts. These are people who fight disinformation. Only 7 were able to get visas. NATO and the EU were co-hosts of that event, and not even with them could we get visas. I only got a visa because I live in Tbilisi at the moment. So for some reason,
can I add something here?
Yeah, go for it.
I was having a meeting a few weeks back with the EU ambassador to Jordan, and we were talking about why we don't do a lot of activities where we work with Europe versus the United States. And I was like saying exactly what you just said. Man, if you guys think traveling for Africans is hard, try to travel as a Muslim and try to travel as an Arab.
Yeah.
And embassies here are too small to even handle visas to basically send you to the outsourcing agencies. And without a doubt, it can take from a month to 2 just to get an appointment. So
I'm going to share it.
I get invitations to speak at every major conference in the world. None of the Europeans when I ever managed to get an appointment, even before the time of the conference. And in some cases, I had some of these invitations coming from ministries of foreign affairs or the prime minister office in certain European countries. I still can't get a visa. If you
allow me more in that, because I worked a lot on that issue regarding I worked in terms as DCN, we have tried to get visas, etc. It is a peculiar time due that the world is coming after COVID, and it has been extremely difficult, I think, from all the embassies in order to be able to handle.
No, I'm talking about
I will give you an example, and I will give you an example between Greece and India. In India, but okay, this is not the case. Now we can discuss that later on. I think we diversify the discussion somewhere else. So let's keep it.
I'll finish my comments with a bit of a tip for everyone who's having his visa problems. The problem is, as Mo said, many of the Western governments have outsourced visa processing to like an Amazon company. They're a call center. They don't care, except Poland. So right-wing nativist Poland at the moment, for whatever reason, maybe it's just Africa, but their embassies are too small, and maybe not enough Africans go there for them to appoint a private organization. But you still get to see a diplomat. In fact, they invite you in for tea, and you get your visa very quickly. So Mo, go to the Polish. Hopefully, they work for you. Most of my staff are based in places like Sudan and what, so they are Muslim Africans, so it's like compounded. I get it. It's like fucking stupid, and sorry about the swearing. But Europe and America are doing themselves harm. The final thing I just want to kind of point out, because it's super important, is that digital disinformation isn't just a threat for countries with high penetration. It's an even bigger threat for countries with low internet penetration, because those people who do have access to the internet and get exposed to conspiracies have a disproportionate influence as kind of intermediaries for offline communities. And those offline communities have access to the internet to go and find other information that inoculates or kind of disproves the conspiracies that they're being told. So we also must not ignore offline communities, because they're the ones who are even more at risk from this online disinformation. So that's it from me. I'm sorry again for over speaking. I babble. You should just mute me every now and again. But back to the rest of the panel.
I don't know if I'd ever just mute you. I might just very politely be like, "Oh, Justin, thank you so much." But I don't think it's over speaking at all. And any of the speakers, because we've just had so much interesting, like, valuable information shared. And like I said, this is not information that's normally shared. It's not a conversation that normally happens. It's very different. So we welcome the thoughts, absolutely. And I think this conversation is going to continue online either way. I really do foresee a follow-up, hint, hint, Nikos, I see a follow-up conversation of some kind. Definitely
community, and actually with people all around the globe. Aurra.
Absolutely. That's why we are DCN Global, because we are inclusive. And so Ari, you are, Keiso says she's going to type out. She has very weak connection, so she's going to type out her final remarks. So while she's typing out her final remarks, Ari, please can you share your takeaways from this discussion and any last remarks?
Yeah, what Justin mentioned a few seconds ago is actually bringing back a memory of 3 housewife mothers who during 2019 Indonesian presidential election is doing it conventional way. They actually knocking door to door, telling people not to select certain candidate, because if they select candidate, then the regulation on this and that will be replaced, and then the police actually have already took this case to trial, and there are actually becomes or still in jail, I believe. I'm not sure whether they already get out or not. But again, offline communities are still super important for us to be able to reach for them, because eventually what we've been discussing for the an hour and a half earlier, this is something that already surface, already exists even before the social media, even before the gadgets and internet connection exists. This is I think this is the basic nature of the way how human behaving. Like we prefer sensational news over the fact that we're feeling more triggered, we're feeling more attracted to sensational negative news instead of the factual news. And the classic term bad news versus good news, and also the way how fact-check articles are distributed way less compared to the number of misinformation distribution. For example, if the misinformation is distributed 10,000 shares, it is so common, so typical, classic, that the fact-check article will be shared less than 1,000. This is something that has been happening for years. Therefore, public as eventually, if I often take looking at this using the approach of supply and demand. Why I said that hate speech, why I said that false information and other negative content still distributing in social media, it's because the consumer, we're the social media user, are actually the one who still prefer to share the bad side of the technology. So it is important to also involve the platform, to also involve the technology, but eventually this is something that depends on the people with our help, of course, the academic, the news, and other important role player, influencers, for example. We also need to help the public, but eventually this is something that unfortunately the solution is something that will take not just one night or even a few months or even few years education. So basically when we are able to educate the public, so guys, let's just stop spreading false information, hate speech on using technology. Eventually the bad guys, the hoax peddlers, and the one who's doing using technology for negative cause, for negative for bad things, eventually the bad producers will shut down themselves because nobody's consuming their product. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ari. And yeah, very realist perspective in that. It's going to take a long time. You know, you made me think of, it's still one of my favoritist. I used to say this, I think, in every DCN webinar. I don't know why I stopped, but one of my favoritist proverbs, African proverbs, is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I think a big take home from this for me personally is that we're going to have to come together in one way or another to at least try and make some kind of headway. To touch on what Keiso has shared in her final remarks is that Lesotho mainly trades with South Africa. And now that it's winter season, it means commodities are very high. My take home will be to collaborate with Justin. I think this is supposed to be Justin, with Justin and other colleagues here to use my media platforms here for impactful stories that will change Basotho's perspective on Russia and Ukraine conflict. So I foresee a residency of some kind being birthed from this conversation that sees a grand scale collaboration that at least allows us to have all the data. At the very least, let's have the facts in one place and be able to share information, as Justin rightly said. I think this brings us to the end of our discussion today. Very quickly, while we're wrapping up, I always allow people, please feel free to share your Twitter handles or LinkedIn's if you'd like to connect with people. Where can people find you on social media? Let's collaborate, let's connect. I think this conversation shouldn't just end here in this Zoom meeting. I think there's an opportunity for us to continue to connect and to continue to build new networks and new opportunities to grow. So please share your Twitter handle or your whatever social link you'd like to share in the chat right now while we're wrapping up. A special thank you to my co-host Aisha Down, as well as our not so backdoor professor today, Nikos Panagiotou. Thank you so much, colleagues, for joining us today and for just helping organize such a great conversation. And of course, a huge thank you to our speakers, Justin, Ari, Keiso, Mo. You have taken out an hour and a half of your time, an hour, 40 minutes of your time to talk about this. And we deeply appreciate you. We deeply appreciate your time and your expertise and all the information that you shared with us today. Thank you so much. And I think I also...
two great moderators, Aurra and Aisha as well.